Before we begin, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. If you like my stories, please consider giving me like and subscribe. It means the whole world to me. Enjoy the stories, and I hope you get the scare you're looking for. I never bought into ghost stories. The idea of spirits lingering or cursed places always seemed like something people made up to scare each other or explain away their own fears. I was the guy who'd scoff at tales of haunted houses, chalking them up to bad wiring or overactive imaginations. That was before I rented the old apartment above the antique shop. It was cheap, close to my new job, and I figured the creaky floors and dusty windows were just part of its charm. The shop owner, a quiet old man with a permanent frown, warned me not to mess with anything in the storage room. I nodded, thinking he was just protective of his inventory. I should have listened. The apartment was small, a single bedroom with a living area, a kitchenette, and a narrow hallway leading to a locked door I assumed was the storage room. The place smelled of old wood and mothballs, and the walls were covered in faded wallpaper that peeled at the edges. I moved in with just a mattress, a few boxes, and my laptop, planning to stay until I could afford something better. The first night was uneventful. The building creaked, the pipes groaned, but it was nothing I couldn't ignore. I slept fine, woke up, and went to work, thinking nothing of it. The second night, I heard the humming. It was faint, like a distant radio left on, coming from the direction of the storage room. I checked the hallway, but the door was locked, the keyhole rusted shut. I pressed my ear against the wood, and the humming stopped, replaced by a soft tapping, like fingers drumming on the other side. I backed away, telling myself it was just the building settling, maybe a loose pipe, but the sound followed me back to bed, growing louder, more insistent, until it felt like it was coming from inside the walls. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I asked the shop owner about the noises. He didn't look up from his ledger, just muttered something about the building being old and to leave the storage room alone. His tone was sharp, and his hand shook as he turned the page. I let it go, figuring he was just a cranky old man, but his reaction stuck with me. That night, the humming was back, joined by a new sound, a low, rhythmic scraping, like something being dragged across the floor. It was coming from the storage room again. I grabbed a flashlight and a screwdriver, thinking I'd pry the door open and see what was making the noise. The lock wouldn't budge, and the scraping stopped the moment I touched the door. I went back to bed, but the silence was worse, heavy and watchful. The next morning, I noticed scratches on the storage room door, shallow, uneven marks, like someone had clawed at it with their nails. They weren't there the day before. I tried to convince myself it was just wear and tear, but the marks were too fresh. The wood splintered in places. I bought a deadbolt for my bedroom door and installed it that day, telling myself it was just for peace of mind. That night, the noises changed. The humming and scraping were gone, replaced by whispers, soft, overlapping voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. They seemed to come from everywhere, seeping through the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I locked myself in my bedroom. The deadbolt clicked shut, but the whispers followed, growing louder, more urgent, until they felt like they were inside my head. I didn't sleep. I sat on my mattress, clutching the screwdriver, listening as the whispers turned into a chant, rhythmic and relentless. At some point, I heard a new sound, a slow, deliberate creak, like the storage room door opening. I stared at my bedroom door, expecting the handle to turn, but it stayed still. The chanting stopped just before dawn, and the apartment fell silent. I waited until sunlight streamed through the window before unlocking the door. The hallway was empty, the storage room door still locked, but the scratches were deeper now, forming jagged patterns that looked almost like symbols. I decided to move out. I called the shop owner to break the lease, but he didn't answer. I left messages, sent emails, but got no response. I packed my things, planning to leave that day, but when I tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. The lock turned, the handle moved, but it was like the door was sealed shut. I checked the windows, but they were stuck too, the frames warped and unyielding. Panic set in, and I grabbed the screwdriver, trying to pry the storage room door open. I needed to know what was in there, what was doing this. The lock gave way with a snap, and the door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that rushed out was cold, damp, and carried a stench like rotting leaves. I hesitated, my flashlight beam barely piercing the gloom. The whispers started again, softer now, urging me downward. I don't know why I went. It was like the apartment itself was pulling me, guiding my steps. The staircase was steep, the walls rough stone, slick with moisture. At the bottom was a small room, its floor covered in dirt, its walls etched with the same symbols I'd seen on the door. In the center was a mirror, tall and tarnished, its surface clouded but reflective. The whispers were louder here, a chorus of voices that made my head throb. I approached the mirror, my reflection distorted, stretched, like I was looking through warped glass. The whispers grew frantic, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement behind me in the reflection. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I looked back, my reflection was gone. In its place was a figure, tall, thin, its limbs bent at wrong angles, its face a blank void except for two glowing eyes. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering, but the figure didn't move. It just watched, its presence filling the room with a weight that made it hard to breathe. I ran, scrambling up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. I dragged a bookcase in front of it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wood. The whispers followed, louder now, joined by a low, guttural laugh that seemed to come from inside the walls. I tried the front door again, pounding on it, screaming for help, but no one came. The apartment felt alive, the air pulsing with a rhythm that matched the chanting. I locked myself in the bedroom, shoving the mattress against the door, and sat there, listening as the noises grew closer. Scratching, whispering, laughing, all circling the apartment like predators. I don't know how long I stayed there, curled up in the dark, the screwdriver in my hand. The noises stopped at some point, replaced by that heavy silence again. I waited, too scared to move, until I heard a new sound, a soft knock on the bedroom door. It was slow, deliberate, like someone testing if I was still there. I didn't answer. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, until it was a pounding that shook the door in its frame. Then it stopped, and I heard the creak of the storage room door opening again, even though I'd blocked it. I don't remember much after that. I woke up on the floor, the screwdriver still in my hand, the apartment silent. The front door was open, the bookcase pushed aside, the storage room door closed and locked as if nothing had happened. I grabbed my bag and ran, not stopping until I was miles away. I never went back. I left everything, my clothes, my laptop, my deposit. I didn't care. I moved to a new city, found a new place, and tried to forget. But I can't. The whispers are still with me, faint but constant, like a radio I can't turn off. I see the figure sometimes in windows, in mirrors, always just out of reach. I avoid reflections now, cover every mirror in my apartment, keep the lights on at night. I don't sleep much. The screwdriver is always nearby, though I know it won't help. Whatever was in that room, whatever I let out, it's not bound to the apartment. It's with me, watching, waiting. I can feel it getting closer, its presence heavier each night. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done. It's never done. I never put much stock in ghost stories. Growing up, I'd laugh off tales of haunted houses or cursed objects, chalking them up to overactive imaginations or people looking for a thrill. I was the practical type, always searching for a logical explanation. That mindset carried me through most of my life, until I inherited my uncle's cabin in the woods. It was a small, weathered place, tucked deep in a forest so dense the sun barely reached the ground. He'd left it to me in his will, along with a note that said, "Don't stay too long." I figured he meant the place was a dump, not worth keeping. I was wrong. The cabin was a few hours' drive from anything resembling civilization. I went up there to assess it, maybe fix it up to sell. The moment I arrived, the air felt wrong. Thick, like it was pressing against my skin. The trees loomed too close, their branches clawing at the sky, and the silence was unnatural, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig. The cabin itself was a relic. Sagging porch, warped wooden walls, and windows clouded with grime. Inside, it smelled of damp wood and something sour I couldn't place. I set up a sleeping bag in the main room, planning to stay a couple of nights to catalog what needed repairs. The first night was quiet, save for the creaks and groans of the old structure settling. I told myself it was just the wind, the age of the place, nothing more. I spent the next day poking around, noting cracked beams and a leaky roof. In the back of the cabin, I found a trap door under a threadbare rug, leading to a root cellar. It was locked with a heavy iron bolt, rusted but sturdy. I didn't have the tools to open it, so I left it alone, figuring I'd deal with it later. That night, I heard the first sound, a low, rhythmic thumping, like something heavy dragging across the floor below. I sat up, heart racing, listening. The sound came from beneath the cabin, directly under the trap door. It wasn't constant. It would stop for long stretches, then start again, deliberate and slow. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the main room, but everything was in place. The trap door was still locked, the bolt unmoved. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a bear, though the thought of a bear under the cabin didn't exactly calm my nerves. I pushed a chair against the trap door and went back to sleep, or tried to. The thumping didn't stop until dawn. The next day, I drove to the nearest town for supplies and asked around about the cabin. The locals didn't say much, just exchanged glances and told me the place had a bad history. One old man at the hardware store muttered about things that don't stay buried, but he clammed up when I pressed for details. I bought a crowbar and headed back, determined to open the trap door and prove there was nothing to fear. The bolt gave way after some effort, and the trap door creaked open, revealing a set of stone steps descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and rank, like something long dead. I hesitated, my flashlight beam barely cutting through the gloom. The steps were uneven, slick with moisture, and the walls were rough earth, studded with roots that looked almost like fingers. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just a cellar, but my gut screamed at me to leave. I went down anyway. The cellar was small, no bigger than a shed, with a dirt floor and walls carved with strange, jagged symbols. In the center was a wooden box, about the size of a coffin, its lid nailed shut. The thumping started again, louder now, coming from inside the box. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was slow, deliberate, like something testing the wood. I backed toward the stairs, my flashlight shaking in my hand, but the thumping stopped as suddenly as it began. I wanted to run, but I couldn't leave without knowing what was in there. I pried open the box with the crowbar, the nails screeching as they gave way. Inside was nothing, just dirt and a few scraps of cloth, stained dark with something that wasn't water. But the smell was overwhelming, a mix of decay and something metallic. I slammed the lid shut and bolted up the stairs, locking the trapdoor behind me. That night, the thumping turned into scratching, sharp, insistent, like nails clawing at the underside of the trapdoor. I piled every heavy object I could find on top of it. Chairs, a table, even a rusted toolbox. The scratching didn't stop. It grew louder, more frantic, spreading to the walls, the ceiling, the windows. I sat in the middle of the cabin, clutching the crowbar, telling myself it was just an animal, but the sounds were too coordinated, too purposeful. Then came the whisper, a low, guttural voice, speaking words I couldn't understand. It wasn't coming from one place. It was everywhere, seeping through the walls like damp rot. I didn't sleep. By morning, the noises had stopped, but the cabin felt different, like it was holding its breath. I noticed scratches on the trapdoor, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. They weren't random. They formed patterns like the symbols I'd seen in the cellar. I decided to leave, to get as far from the cabin as possible. But when I tried to start my car, the engine was dead. I checked the battery, the wires, everything. Nothing was wrong, but it wouldn't turn over. I was stranded. I called a tow service, but the signal was weak and the call kept dropping. I walked a mile down the dirt road trying to find a signal, but the forest seemed to swallow the sound, muffling everything except the rustle of leaves. When I got back to the cabin, the trap door was open. The furniture I'd piled on top was scattered across the room, as if thrown by a storm. I didn't go near it. I grabbed my bag and started walking, planning to hitchhike to town. That's when I saw the figure. It stood at the edge of the trees, just beyond the clearing. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs bent at wrong angles, its head tilted like it was studying me. Its face was a blur, like a smudge in the air, but I could feel its eyes, or where eyes should have been. I froze, my breath hitching, and it took a step toward me, its movements jerky, like a puppet on frayed strings. I ran back to the cabin, slamming the door and barricading it with the table. The whispering started again, louder now, joined by a low hum that made my teeth ache. I spent the night huddled in the corner, the crowbar in my hands, listening as the scratching circled the cabin. The windows rattled, though there was no wind, and shadows moved across the walls, even with no light to cast them. I kept my eyes on the trapdoor, expecting it to burst open, but it stayed shut. At some point, I must have passed out from exhaustion because I woke up to silence. The cabin was still, the air heavy with that sour smell. The trapdoor was closed, but the furniture was back in place, as if nothing had happened. I didn't trust it. I grabbed my bag and ran, not stopping until I reached the main road. A trucker picked me up and drove me to town, asking no questions despite my disheveled state. I didn't go back for my car or my things. I sold the cabin through a lawyer, never setting foot in it again. I moved to a new city, far from the forest, and tried to put it behind me. But the whispers followed. They're faint, barely audible, but they're there, especially at night when the world is quiet. Sometimes I see it, the figure standing in the corner of my vision, just out of reach. I don't sleep much anymore. I keep the lights on, the curtains drawn, and a crowbar by my bed. I tell myself it's over, that I escaped, but I know better. Whatever was in that cellar, whatever I let out, it's still with me. It's patient, waiting, and I can feel it getting closer. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done. It's never done. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. Ghost stories were just campfire tales, and haunted places were nothing more than old buildings with good marketing. I prided myself on seeing through the nonsense, always finding a rational explanation for creaks in the night or shadows in the corner. That was before I took a job as a night watchman at the old factory on the edge of town. It was a temporary gig, just enough to cover rent while I looked for something better. The pay was decent and the job was simple. Walk the grounds, check the locks, and make sure no one broke in. The factory had been abandoned for years, its machinery silent, its windows boarded up. Locals said it was cursed, that workers who died in accidents there never really left. I laughed it off. Old buildings always have stories. I wish I'd listened. My first shift started without a hitch. The factory was a sprawling maze of rusted metal and cracked concrete, its halls echoing with every step I took. The air was heavy with the smell of oil and dust, and the only light came from my flashlight and the occasional flicker of a dying fluorescent bulb. I followed the patrol route, checking doors and windows, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The place was eerie, sure, but I told myself it was just the atmosphere of an abandoned building. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. I finished my rounds, settled into the guard booth, and tried to stay awake through the night. The second night was when things started to feel off. As I walked the main production floor, I heard a faint tapping like metal on metal, coming from deep within the factory. I figured it was a loose pipe or the wind rattling something outside, but the sound was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone hammering in a slow, steady beat. I followed it, my flashlight sweeping over rows of silent machines, their shapes looming like giant insects in the dark. The tapping stopped when I reached the far end of the floor, where a heavy steel door led to the boiler room. It was locked, the padlock rusted but intact. I tugged at it, but it didn't budge. The air around the door was colder than the rest of the factory, and for a moment I thought I saw my breath fog in the beam of my flashlight. I shook it off and went back to my rounds. That night, the tapping didn't stop. It followed me, faint but persistent, echoing through the halls no matter where I went. I checked every corner, every machine, but found nothing. By the time my shift ended, my nerves were frayed, but I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on me. I went home, slept, and returned the next night, determined to ignore it. But the tapping was louder, joined by a new sound, a low, grinding hum, like machinery trying to start. I checked the breaker room, thinking maybe someone had tampered with the power, but everything was off, the switches cold and untouched. The hum seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating through the floor into my bones. On the fourth night, I found the footprints. I was checking the loading docks when my flashlight caught them, smudges in the thick layer of dust, too fresh to have been there long. They were bare feet, small, like a child's, leading from the docks to the boiler room door. I followed them, my heart pounding, but they stopped abruptly at the door, as if whoever made them had vanished. I checked the padlock again. It was still locked, no signs of tampering. I told myself it was a prank, maybe kids sneaking in, but the factory was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and I hadn't seen a single broken lock or cut wire. I swept the footprints away with my boot, trying to erase the unease they left behind. The next night, the sounds changed. The tapping and humming were gone, replaced by whispers. They were faint, like voices carried on the wind, but there was no mistaking them. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, overlapping in a soft, relentless murmur. I tried to pinpoint where they were coming from, but they seemed to move, circling me as I walked the halls. I called out, demanding whoever it was to show themselves, but my voice echoed back, unanswered. The whispers grew louder when I neared the boiler room door, so loud I could feel them in my chest, like a pressure building inside me. I didn't touch the door that night. I stayed in the guard booth, my flashlight trained on the entrance, waiting for my shift to end. I called my supervisor the next day, asking about the factory's history. He was dismissive, saying it was just an old building with a bad reputation, nothing to worry about. When I pressed, he admitted there'd been accidents years ago. Workers caught in machines, a fire in the boiler room that killed a few men. He told me to stop letting my imagination run wild and do my job. I thought about quitting, but I needed the money, and I wasn't about to let some noises scare me off. I went back that night, armed with a crowbar I'd brought from home, just in case. The whispers were waiting for me. They started the moment I stepped inside, louder and more insistent, like a crowd arguing just out of earshot. I ignored them, focusing on my rounds, but the air felt heavier, the darkness thicker. My flashlight flickered, its beam dimming even though I'd put in fresh batteries. When I reached the boiler room door, I found it ajar. The padlock was gone, the door slightly open, revealing a sliver of blackness beyond. I know I should have left, called for backup, anything, but something pulled me forward like a hook in my gut. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The boiler room was a cavern of rusted pipes and towering machinery, the air thick with the stench of oil and something fouler, like rotting meat. My flashlight barely lit the space, its beam swallowed by the shadows. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from the walls, the floor, the air itself. I followed the sound, my crowbar gripped tight, until I reached the center of the room. There, on the floor, was a hatch, its edges caked with grime. It was unlocked. The bolt slid back as if someone had just opened it. The whispers were coming from below. I don't know why I did it. I lifted the hatch, revealing a narrow shaft with a ladder leading down into darkness. The smell that hit me was overwhelming, a mix of decay and damp earth. I climbed down, my flashlight shaking in my hand, the whispers urging me on. The shaft opened into a small chamber, its walls carved with symbols that looked like they'd been scratched in with a knife. In the center was a pile of bones, human, I was sure of it, arranged in a spiral, their surfaces etched with the same symbols. The whispers stopped and the silence was worse, pressing against my ears like water. Then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the chamber, its body too tall, its limbs too thin, its head a featureless void except for two glowing points where eyes should have been. It didn't move, just stood there watching me. I backed toward the ladder, my flashlight flickering. But the figure was suddenly closer, though I hadn't seen it take a step. I scrambled up the ladder, my hand slipping on the rungs, and slammed the hatch shut. I ran through the boiler room, out of the factory, and didn't stop until I was in my car, speeding away. I quit the job the next day. I didn't go back for my last paycheck or my things. I told my supervisor to mail them, but I never gave him my new address. I moved to a new town, far from the factory, and tried to forget. But the whispers followed me. They're faint, barely audible, but they're there, especially when I'm alone. I see the figure sometimes in reflections, in the shadows of my apartment, always just out of reach. I don't sleep much anymore. I keep the lights on, the crowbar by my bed, and I avoid mirrors. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done with me. It's waiting, and I can feel it getting closer every night. I never believed in ghosts. The idea of spirits lingering after death always seemed like something people made up to scare kids or explain creaky floorboards. I grew up in a small town where everyone had a story. Haunted bridges, cursed fields, shadowy figures in the woods. But I laughed them off. The world made sense to me. Things die, they stay dead, and houses are just houses. That's what I thought when I rented the old place at the end of Maple Street. It was a run-down 2-story with chipped paint and a sagging porch, but it was dirt cheap, and I was broke. I needed a place to live, and it was the best I could afford. The landlord warned me it had been empty for years, said some folks thought it was off. I figured it was just small-town superstition and signed the lease without a second thought. The first few days were fine. The house was old, sure. Creaky stairs, drafty windows, a faint musty smell that never went away, but nothing I couldn't handle. I spent my time unpacking, setting up my desk for remote work, and ignoring the occasional odd noise. Old houses settle, I told myself. Pipes groan, wood shifts. That's all it was. But by the end of the first week, I started to notice things that didn't add up. At night, when I was trying to sleep, there'd be this faint tapping, like someone was lightly rapping their knuckles on the walls. It wasn't consistent enough to pin down, but it was always there, just loud enough to keep me awake. I checked the house top to bottom, pipes, vents, windows. Nothing explained it. I even set out mousetraps, thinking maybe rodents were the culprits. They stayed empty. By the second week, the tapping turned into something else. It wasn't just random anymore. It had a rhythm, like a code. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 slow ones. It would start in the living room, move to the hallway, and sometimes end right outside my bedroom door. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was just the house, but my heart would pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. One night, I got up the nerve to open the door when the tapping was at its loudest. The hallway was empty, the air cold and still. I flicked on the light, half expecting to see something, but there was nothing, just the faded wallpaper and the worn floorboards. I laughed it off, feeling stupid, but I didn't sleep that night. Things got worse after that. I started noticing small changes around the house. My coffee mug would be on the wrong shelf, even though I always left it by the sink. The front door, which I locked every night, would be slightly ajar in the morning. Once, I found my shoes lined up neatly by the fireplace, though I'd left them scattered by the door. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was sleepwalking, or maybe I was just stressed from work. But deep down, I knew I wasn't moving things in my sleep. I started double-checking locks, taking pictures of where I left things to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. The pictures didn't help. Things still moved. I stopped sleeping well. The tapping had become a nightly ritual, but now it was accompanied by other sounds. Whispers, too soft to make out words, but loud enough to know they were there. They seemed to come from the walls, like voices trapped inside the plaster. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I'd heard someone say my name, only to find the house silent. My dreams were no better. I'd see myself walking through the house, but it wasn't the house I knew. The rooms were wrong, too big, too dark, with hallways that stretched on forever. In the dreams, something was always behind me, just out of sight, its breath hot on my neck. I'd wake up gasping, the feeling of being watched lingering long after I opened my eyes. I started digging into the house's history. The town library had a collection of old newspapers, and I spent hours combing through them. The house didn't have much of a paper trail, but I found a few mentions. It had been built in the late 1800s, home to a family who'd lived there for generations. The last owner, a widow, had died in the house decades ago. The article was vague, saying she'd been found in the attic, no cause of death listed. Neighbors had reported hearing strange noises, tapping, whispers, footsteps, before she died. The house had been empty ever since, passed from one absentee landlord to another. I tried to shake it off. Old houses come with old stories, but the parallels were too close to ignore. I started avoiding the house as much as I could. I'd work late, hang out at the diner, anything to delay going back. But I couldn't avoid it forever. One night, I came home exhausted and collapsed into bed without turning on the lights. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural hum, like someone chanting under their breath. It was coming from the closet. I froze, my skin prickling, every instinct screaming at me to run. Instead, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the closet door. It was closed, but the humming didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, like it was reacting to the light. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was tired of being scared. But I opened the door. The closet was empty, just my clothes hanging there, a few boxes on the shelf. The humming stopped the second I opened the door, replaced by that heavy, suffocating silence. I stood there, shaking, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. I slammed the door shut and slept on the couch that night, a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. The next morning, I checked the closet again. Everything was where it should be, but there was a smell, faint like rotting fruit, coming from the back wall. I pressed my hand against it and it felt cold, unnaturally so, like touching a block of ice. I didn't open the closet again after that. I started noticing shadows, not just in the corner of my eye, but full-on shapes moving across the walls when I was alone. They weren't human, not exactly. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent wrong. I'd see them in the hallway, the kitchen, the living room, always just out of focus. If I turned to look directly, they'd be gone. I stopped using the upstairs bathroom after I saw one in the mirror, standing behind me, its head tilted at an impossible angle. I couldn't tell if it had a face. I didn't want to know. I started keeping every light on at night, but it didn't help. The shadows seemed to grow bolder, lingering longer, like they were getting comfortable. I called a friend, someone I trusted, and told him everything. He thought I was losing it, said I needed to get out of the house, that it was probably just stress or carbon monoxide poisoning. I checked the house for gas leaks, nothing. But he was right about one thing. I couldn't stay. I started looking for a new place, but the lease locked me in for another 6 months and I didn't have the money to break it. I was trapped. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Not the tapping, but heavy, deliberate steps, like someone pacing the hallway outside my bedroom. They were slow, methodical, stopping just outside my door before starting again. I grabbed the knife from under my pillow and sat up, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. It didn't. The footsteps just kept going, back and forth for hours. I didn't move until the sun came up and the sound stopped. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty, but there were marks on the floor, long, deep scratches, like something had been dragged across the wood. I couldn't take it anymore. I called a priest, someone the librarian had mentioned when I was researching the house. He was old, skeptical, but he agreed to come by. He walked through the house, sprinkling holy water, muttering prayers. I followed him, clutching a cross he'd given me, though I didn't believe in it. The house felt different while he was there, quieter, lighter, like it was holding its breath. When he left, he told me to call him if anything else happened. I thanked him, feeling a flicker of hope. That night, I went to bed thinking maybe it was over. The house was silent, no tapping, no footsteps. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. But when I woke up, I wasn't in my bed. I was in the attic, standing in the middle of the room, barefoot, in the dark. The air was thick with dust, the smell of decay choking me. I didn't remember coming up here. My phone was still downstairs, so I fumbled for the light switch. When it flicked on, I wished it hadn't. The walls were covered in scratches, not random, but words carved deep into the wood. Mine, over and over, in jagged, angry letters. Some were fresh, the wood still splintered, like they'd been carved while I was standing there. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Something moved in the corner. A shadow, tall and wrong, its limbs twitching like a spider's. I scrambled to my feet and ran, tripping down the attic stairs, through the house, out the front door. I didn't stop until I was in my car, doors locked, shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. I haven't gone back. I'm staying with a friend now, sleeping on his couch, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. I hear the tapping sometimes, faint, in the walls of his apartment. My dreams are worse. Dark rooms, endless hallways, that shadow always behind me. I keep thinking about the attic, those words carved into the walls. Mine. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done with me. I check my phone obsessively, half expecting to find pictures I didn't take, or recordings of that humming, that voice. I'm scared to go back to the house, but I'm more scared of what happens if I don't. What if it's still waiting for me? What if it always will be? I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. Growing up, I laughed off ghost stories and rolled my eyes at people who swore they'd seen something in the dark. But after what happened last summer, I can't dismiss those things anymore. I don't know what I saw or what I experienced, but it's changed me. I haven't slept properly since, and I don't think I ever will again. I'm writing this because I need to get it out, and maybe someone out there can make sense of it, or at least tell me I'm not crazy. It started when my friend Mark invited me to spend a weekend at his family's cabin. He'd been going on about it for weeks, saying it was the perfect place to unplug, fish, and drink some beers by the lake. I was hesitant because I'm not much of an outdoors person, but Mark was persistent, and I was going through a rough patch at work. A break sounded nice, so I agreed. The cabin was a few hours' drive from the city, tucked deep in a forest that stretched for miles. Mark said his family had owned it for decades, passed down from his grandparents. He described it as rustic but cozy, with a wood stove, a creaky porch, and a view of the lake that made it all worthwhile. We arrived late in the afternoon. The drive had been uneventful, just me, Mark, and his girlfriend Sarah blasting music and joking around. The cabin was exactly as he'd described, old, wooden, and a little weathered, but charming in its own way. It sat at the edge of a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines that blocked out most of the sunlight. The lake was a short walk away, its surface so still it looked like a sheet of glass. I remember feeling a strange twinge when we pulled up, like the air was heavier than it should have been, but I chalked it up to being tired from the drive. We unpacked our stuff, cracked open a few beers, and started a fire in the wood stove. The cabin's interior was simple: a main room with a couch and a table, a tiny kitchen area, and 2 small bedrooms upstairs. The walls were lined with old photos of Mark's family, black and white shots of people fishing or posing on the porch. There was a faint musty smell, like the place hadn't been aired out in a while, but it wasn't bad. Sarah made a joke about the place being haunted, and Mark laughed, saying the only spirits here were the ones in the liquor cabinet. I smiled, but that twinge came back, sharper this time. I ignored it. That first night was fine. We grilled some burgers, played cards, and stayed up late talking. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet, but I figured that was just how it was out here. I went to bed in one of the upstairs rooms, a small space with a single bed and a window that looked out into the trees. I remember staring out that window before I turned off the lamp, trying to make out shapes in the darkness. It was pitch black, the kind of dark you don't get in the city. I fell asleep quickly, the beer and the long drive pulling me under. I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was, but the cabin was silent, and the darkness outside was absolute. I lay there, trying to figure out what had woken me. Then I heard it, a faint tapping like someone was lightly knocking on the wall. It was rhythmic, deliberate, coming from somewhere downstairs. My first thought was that Mark or Sarah was up, maybe moving around in the kitchen. But the sound didn't stop, and it didn't sound like footsteps or anything normal. It was too precise, too consistent. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, my heart beating a little faster. The air felt cold, colder than it should have been for summer. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the house settling or a branch hitting the side of the cabin. But the tapping kept going, and now it was joined by another sound, a low, almost inaudible hum, like someone whispering far away. I couldn't make out words, but it had a cadence like a chant. I grabbed my phone, thinking I'd text Mark to see if he was awake, but there was no signal. Not surprising, given how far out we were, but it made me feel oddly isolated. I got out of bed, my bare feet freezing on the wooden floor, and crept to the door. The tapping was louder now, and the humming was clearer, though still too faint to understand. I opened the door and peered into the hallway. The cabin was dark, but a faint glow came from downstairs like someone had left a lamp on. I called out softly for Mark, then Sarah. No answer. The tapping stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was worse. It was heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and made my way downstairs, each step creaking under my weight. The main room was empty, the fire in the wood stove long gone out. The glow I'd seen wasn't from a lamp. It was coming from outside, through the windows. It was faint, a sickly yellowish light that seemed to pulse slightly like a heartbeat. I froze, my flashlight beam shaking in my hand. The humming was louder now, and it wasn't coming from inside the cabin. It was outside, somewhere in the trees. I don't know why I didn't go back upstairs and wake Mark and Sarah. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something else, something pulling me toward the door. I opened it and stepped onto the porch, the cold air hitting me like a slap. The forest was still, but that yellow light was stronger now, flickering through the trees maybe 100 yards away. The humming was clearer too, and I could almost make out words, though they weren't in any language I recognized. It sounded old, guttural, like something you'd hear in a forgotten corner of the world. I should have gone back inside. I know that now. But instead, I stepped off the porch and started walking toward the light. The ground was uneven, covered in pine needles and roots, and my flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The air grew colder the closer I got, and the humming became a chant, low and rhythmic, like a prayer or a ritual. My stomach twisted, but I kept going, drawn to that light like a moth. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I saw it. The light wasn't coming from a fire or a lantern. It was coming from the ground. There was a patch of earth, maybe 10 feet across, glowing with that sickly yellow light. It pulsed slowly, and the air above it shimmered, like heat rising off pavement. The chanting was loud now, filling my head, and I realized it wasn't coming from any one direction. It was everywhere, in the air, in the ground, in my bones. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that light. It could have been seconds or hours. But then I saw something move in the trees beyond the clearing. It was tall, too tall to be human, and it didn't move like anything I'd ever seen. It glided, its shape indistinct, like it was made of shadow but heavier, more solid. My flashlight beam caught it for a split second, and I saw eyes, huge, reflective, like pools of oil. They locked onto me, and I felt a wave of terror so intense I thought I'd pass out. I turned and ran. The chanting grew louder, chasing me through the trees, and I could hear something moving behind me, fast and deliberate. Branches snapped, and the ground seemed to shake under my feet. I don't know how I made it back to the cabin, but when I did, I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the bolt. The chanting stopped, and the silence was deafening. I stood there, panting, waiting for something to break down the door. Nothing did. After a few minutes, I worked up the courage to look out the window. The yellow light was gone, and the forest was dark again, but I didn't feel safe. I felt watched. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch, clutching a kitchen knife, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin. When morning came, Mark and Sarah found me there, looking like I'd seen a ghost. I told them everything, expecting them to laugh or call me crazy, but they didn't. Sarah looked pale, and Mark admitted he'd heard the tapping too, but thought it was just the house. They hadn't heard the chanting or seen the light, but they believed me enough to pack up and leave that morning. We didn't talk much on the drive back. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing from the woods following us. When we got to the city, I tried to put it behind me, but I couldn't. I started having nightmares, vivid, horrible dreams of that yellow light and those oil-black eyes. In the dreams, the chanting was clearer, and I could almost understand it, like it was trying to tell me something. I'd wake up screaming, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. A few weeks later, Mark called me. He sounded shaken. He'd gone back to the cabin alone, against my advice, to see if he could figure out what I'd seen. He found the clearing, but there was no light, no chanting. Instead, he found something carved into the trees around it, symbols deep and precise, like they'd been burned into the bark. He took pictures, but when he tried to show me, the images were corrupted, just static and noise. He said he felt watched the whole time he was there, like something was waiting for him to leave. I haven't gone back to the cabin, and I don't plan to. I don't know what was out there in the woods, but I know it wasn't human. I know it saw me, and I know it's still out there. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I hear that tapping again. Faint, but unmistakable. I tell myself it's just the house, just my imagination, but I don't believe it. Not anymore. I've never been one to share stories like this. I'm not the type to believe in things that go bump in the night, and I've always thought people who posted about hauntings or strange encounters were just looking for attention. But what happened to me last summer changed everything. I can't explain it, and I can't forget it. I've tried to move on, but the memory of it clings to me like damp rot. I'm writing this because I need someone, anyone, to hear it. Maybe putting it down will make it feel less real. Or maybe someone out there can tell me what I saw. It started when my cousin invited me to spend a weekend at his family's old farmhouse. He'd inherited it after his grandfather passed, and he was excited to fix it up, maybe even move in someday. The place was remote, sitting at the end of a dirt road surrounded by fields and patches of dense woods. He said it was a good spot to get away from the city, to clear our heads and do some work on the house. I wasn't thrilled about manual labor, but I was between jobs and feeling restless, so I agreed. My cousin, his fiancée, and I packed up a truck with supplies and headed out on a Friday afternoon. The drive was long, the kind that makes you feel like you're leaving civilization behind. The fields stretched on forever, broken only by the occasional crumbling barn or rusted silo. By the time we reached the farmhouse, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the overgrown yard. The house itself was old, 2 stories with peeling paint and a sagging porch. It looked like it had been beautiful once, with tall windows and a wraparound veranda. But now it felt tired, like it was sinking into the earth. Still, my cousin was enthusiastic, pointing out the original woodwork and talking about his plans to restore it. His fiancée seemed less convinced, but she smiled and went along with it. We spent the first evening unloading supplies and exploring the house. The inside was cluttered with old furniture, dusty books, and faded photographs. There was a faint smell of mildew, but nothing unbearable. The living room had a massive stone fireplace, and the kitchen was outdated but functional. Upstairs there were 4 bedrooms, each with creaky floorboards and heavy curtains that blocked out the light. My room had a single bed, a dresser, and a window that overlooked the woods behind the house. I remember thinking the place felt heavy, like the air was thicker than it should have been, but I brushed it off as exhaustion from the drive. That night, we grilled some steaks, drank a few beers, and sat around the fireplace. My cousin told stories about his grandfather, how he'd built half the house himself and used to sit on the porch every evening, whittling. His fiancée teased him about turning into an old man before his time, and we laughed. It was a good night, the kind that makes you feel like everything's going to be okay. When we went to bed, I fell asleep almost instantly, the hum of crickets outside lulling me under. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding. I don't know what roused me, but the room was pitch black, and the silence was absolute. No crickets, no wind, nothing. I lay there trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then I heard it, a faint scratching like nails dragging across wood. It was coming from somewhere downstairs, slow and deliberate. I sat up, my mouth dry, and listened. The scratching stopped, then started again, a little louder, like someone was testing the walls. I told myself it was probably a mouse or the house settling. Old places like this always made weird noises, but the scratching didn't sound random. It had a rhythm, almost like a pattern. I grabbed my phone to check the time, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The battery was dead, which was strange because I'd charged it before bed. I fumbled for the flashlight on the nightstand and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. The room looked normal, but the air felt colder, heavier, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. I got out of bed, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and opened the door to the hallway. The scratching was louder now, and it was definitely coming from downstairs. I called out softly for my cousin, then his fiancée. No answer. The house was silent, except for that relentless scratching. I crept to the top of the stairs, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The air grew colder with every step, and by the time I reached the bottom, my breath was visible in the beam of light. The scratching was coming from the living room. I moved slowly, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. When I reached the doorway, I stopped. The room was dark, the fireplace cold, but the scratching was louder than ever, coming from the far wall near the windows. I swung my flashlight over, expecting to see a rat or maybe a loose shutter banging in the wind. But there was nothing. The wall was bare, just faded wallpaper and a few framed pictures. The scratching stopped the moment my light hit it, and the silence was worse than the noise. I stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. Then I heard a new sound, a low, guttural moan, like someone in pain. It wasn't coming from the wall anymore. It was outside, somewhere in the yard. I don't know why I didn't run back upstairs. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was something else, something pulling me toward the front door. I crossed the room, my flashlight beam bouncing with every step, and opened the door. The night was still, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, but I could see the yard stretching out toward the woods. The moan came again, louder this time, and it wasn't just one voice. It was layered, like a chorus of whispers woven together. I stepped onto the porch, my bare feet freezing on the wood, and aimed my flashlight toward the sound. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the woods, maybe 50 yards away, was a figure. It was tall, too tall, its limbs unnaturally long and thin, like branches stripped of leaves. It didn't move like a person. It swayed, its head tilting at an impossible angle. My flashlight caught its face for a split second, and I wish it hadn't. Its eyes were huge, empty sockets that seemed to drink in the light, and its mouth was a jagged slit, stretched too wide. It wasn't human. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't human. I stumbled back, my flashlight falling from my hand. The thing didn't move toward me, but I felt it watching, its gaze pressing into me like a physical weight. The moaning grew louder, and now I could hear words in it, though they weren't in any language I knew. They were sharp, guttural, like something ancient and angry. I turned and ran back inside, slamming the door and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the bolt. I backed away from the door, expecting it to burst open, but nothing happened. The moaning stopped, and the silence was deafening. I grabbed my flashlight from the porch and ran upstairs, locking myself in my room. I sat on the bed, clutching a pocket knife I'd brought for the trip, listening for any sound. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. The house stayed quiet, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting. When morning came, I found my cousin and his fiancée in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing had happened. I told them everything, my voice shaking as I described the figure and the sounds. They listened, but I could tell they didn't fully believe me. My cousin said it was probably a dream, that old houses could mess with your head. His fiancée was quieter, her eyes darting to the windows like she was looking for something. They hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen anything, but they agreed to leave early, saying we could come back another weekend. We packed up and left by noon. The drive back was tense, none of us talking much. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing standing in the road. When we got back to the city, I tried to put it behind me. I told myself it was a hallucination, maybe brought on by stress or the unfamiliar setting. But the nightmares started that night. In them, I'm back at the farmhouse, standing in the yard, and the figure is there, closer each time. Its mouth moves, and I can almost understand the words, like they're trying to burrow into my mind. A month later, my cousin called me. He'd gone back to the farmhouse alone, wanting to check on something he'd left behind. He found the yard disturbed, like something heavy had been dragged across it. In the woods where I'd seen the figure, there were markings on the trees, deep, jagged lines that didn't look like they'd been made by any tool. He took pictures, but when he tried to send them to me, they wouldn't load, just a blank screen with an error message. He said he felt watched the whole time, like something was waiting for him to leave. I haven't gone back, and I don't plan to. I don't know what that thing was, but I know it saw me. I know it's still there in those woods, waiting. Sometimes at night I hear that scratching again, faint but unmistakable. I tell myself it's just the apartment, just my imagination, but I don't believe it. Not anymore. I keep the curtains drawn and the lights on, and I check the locks twice before bed. I don't know if it can follow me, but I'm not taking any chances. If anyone's been to a place like that, seen something like that, please tell me. I need to know I'm not alone. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this, staring at my screen, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. It started innocently enough, like most bad decisions do. I was bored, scrolling through forums late at night, chasing rabbit holes on the internet. I'd always been curious about the dark web, that shadowy corner of the internet you hear whispers about, where anything can be bought, sold, or seen if you know where to look. I wasn't some tech genius, just a guy with a laptop and too much time on his hands. I figured I'd poke around, see what the fuss was about, maybe find something weird to laugh about later. I had no idea what I was stepping into. It took me a couple of hours to get set up, I downloaded the right browser, learned how to mask my connection, and followed some sketchy instructions from a forum post. The first few sites I found were tame, marketplaces selling knockoff watches, pirated movies, nothing too wild. But the deeper I went, the stranger things got. Forums with cryptic names, threads written in broken English or code-like gibberish, and links that led to pages that didn't seem to make sense. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just clicking, exploring, letting curiosity pull me along. That's when I stumbled across the site. It didn't have a name, just a string of random characters in the URL. The page loaded slowly, a black screen with plain white text that read, "Welcome. Stay if you dare." Below it was a single link labeled Enter. I laughed to myself. How cheesy, like some haunted house gimmick. But something about it hooked me. Maybe it was the late hour, or the eerie silence of my apartment, or just that itch to see what was behind the curtain. I clicked. The next page was different. No flashy graphics, no ads, just a simple interface with a chat box and a video feed that was blacked out. A message popped up. "You are guest 237. Speak or leave." My cursor blinked in the empty chat box. I hesitated, then typed, "Hey, what is this place?" No response. I waited, the silence of my room pressing in around me. Just as I was about to close the tab, the chat box lit up. "Guest 237, you shouldn't be here." My stomach did a little flip. I typed back, "Why not? What's the deal with this site?" No reply for a minute, then another message. "You'll see. Watch the feed." The blacked out video flickered, and a grainy image appeared. It looked like a room, dimly lit, with bare concrete walls. In the center was a chair, empty, bolted to the floor. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The image was low quality, like an old security camera feed. Nothing happened for a few seconds, and I wondered if it was just a still image. Then I saw movement, a shadow passing in front of the camera. My pulse quickened. Was this live? I typed, "What am I looking at?" The response came fast. "Keep watching." I should have closed the tab right then. I should have shut my laptop, gone to bed, and forgotten the whole thing. But I didn't. I kept watching. The shadow moved again, and this time a figure stepped into frame. They wore a dark hoodie, face obscured, and carried something in their hand. A knife, maybe, or a tool. They moved deliberately, placing the object on a table just out of view. Then they turned and looked straight at the camera. I couldn't see their face, but the way they stared, it felt like they were looking right at me. My skin prickled. The chat pinged again. "Do you want to play?" I froze. Play? What did that mean? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was a bad idea. I knew it, but I couldn't stop myself. I typed, "What's the game?" The reply was instant. "Truth or task. Choose." I laughed nervously, alone in my room. This was some kind of role play, right? A creepy internet prank to mess with newbies like me? I decided to humor them. "Truth?" I typed. The response took longer this time. "What are you afraid of?" I frowned. That was it? I thought for a moment, then typed, "Spiders, I guess, and maybe being buried alive." I hit send, feeling a little silly. The chat was quiet for a minute, then the video feed flickered again. The figure was gone, but something new was in the frame. A glass box on the table, crawling with dark shapes. Spiders. Dozens of them, skittering over each other, their legs tapping against the glass. My stomach churned. I typed, "What the hell? How did you know?" No response. The chat stayed silent, but the video feed zoomed in on the box, the spider's movements growing frantic. I couldn't look away. Then the feed cut to black, and a new message appeared. "Your turn again. Truth or task?" I should have stopped. I should have known this wasn't a game, but I was hooked, my heart racing, adrenaline pumping. I typed, "Task." The reply came quickly. "Go to your window, look outside, tell us what you see." My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a quiet building in a boring suburb. It was late, probably past midnight, and the street outside was usually empty. I got up, my chair creaking, and walked to the window. I pulled back the curtain and peered out. The street was dark, the the streetlights casting weak pools of light on the pavement. Nothing unusual, just parked cars, a stray cat darting across the road. I went back to my laptop and typed, "Just the street. Cars, a cat. Nothing weird." The response was immediate. "Look again." I frowned, a chill creeping up my spine. I went back to the window, slower this time. The street looked the same, but something felt off. I squinted, scanning the shadows. Then I saw it. A figure standing under the streetlight across the road. They were too far to make out clearly, but they were facing my building, motionless. My heart thudded. I typed, "There's someone standing outside." Just standing there. The chat pinged. "Wave to them." I laughed, a shaky sound. This was ridiculous. I wasn't going to wave to some random person in the middle of the night. But as I stared at the figure, they raised a hand, slowly, and waved at me. My blood ran cold. I hadn't waved first. I backed away from the window, my hands trembling. I typed, "They waved at me. What the fuck is going on?" The response was simple. Truth or task. I was done playing. I typed, "Who are you? What is this?" No reply. The video feed flickered back on, showing the empty room again, but now there was something new. A laptop on the table, its screen glowing. The camera zoomed in, and I saw what was on the screen. It was my street, my building, my window. I felt like I was going to throw up. I slammed my laptop shut, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't a game. Someone was watching me, someone who knew exactly where I was. I unplugged my router, turned off my phone, and sat in the dark, listening to the silence of my apartment. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the fridge made me jump. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was a prank, some hacker messing with me, using my IP address to scare me. I reinstalled my browser, changed my passwords, and swore I'd never go back to that site. But the unease lingered. I kept checking my window, half expecting to see that figure again. The street was always empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A week later, I got an email. No sender, no subject line, just a single line of text. "You didn't finish the game." My heart stopped. I hadn't given anyone my email, not on that site, not anywhere. I deleted it, blocked the address, but the next day, another one came. Truth or task? I ignored it. The emails kept coming, every day, always the same question. I started noticing things. My laptop turning on by itself, my phone glitching, random texts from unknown numbers with just numbers or symbols. I stopped going online altogether, but it didn't help. One night, I woke up to a sound, a faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. It was coming from my window. I lay frozen in bed, too scared to move. The tapping stopped, but then my laptop, which I'd left unplugged on my desk, powered on. The screen glowed, and there was that video feed again. The concrete room, the chair, the table. But this time, the chair wasn't empty. Someone was sitting in it, bound, gagged, their face hidden by a hood. The figure from before stood beside them, holding a knife. The chat box appeared. "Guess 237 you didn't choose. We chose for you." I screamed, slamming the laptop shut again, but it wouldn't stay off. It kept turning back on, the video feed playing over and over. I threw it against the wall, shattering the screen, but the sound kept going, the tapping at my window starting again. I grabbed a kitchen knife and locked myself in the bathroom, sitting on the cold tile, shaking. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. A new message from an unknown number. "Look behind you." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The tapping at the window grew louder, faster, until it sounded like someone was pounding to get in. I clutched the knife, tears streaming down my face, and waited for whatever was coming. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the noise stopped. The silence was worse. I moved out the next day, crashing at a friend's place, refusing to go back to my apartment. I got a new laptop, a new phone, changed my email, my number, everything. I thought it was over, but last night I got a text, just 3 words, truth or task. I don't know who they are, or how they keep finding me. I don't know what they want, but I know one thing. I'm never going back to that site. And if you're reading this, if you're thinking about poking around in places you don't belong, don't. Close your browser. Walk away. Some games aren't meant to be played. I've always been a lurker on Reddit, scrolling through subreddits late at night when I couldn't sleep. I'd read about everything. Urban legends, true crime, creepy stories people swore were real. Most of it was just entertainment, something to give me a quick chill before bed. But one night, I stumbled across a post that changed everything. It was in a small, obscure subreddit I'd never heard of before, buried deep in a thread about unexplained experiences. The post was simple, just a few lines. Has anyone else gotten a DM from a blank account? No profile, no posts, just a message that says, "Want to see something real?" The comments were sparse, mostly people joking about spam bots or phishing scams. But one reply caught my eye. Don't answer it. I did, and I regret it. No details, just that. I should have listened to the warning bells in my head, but curiosity got the better of me. I checked my inbox. There it was, a DM from a blank account, no username, no profile picture, just those words. Want to see something real? I stared at the message for a long time. My apartment was quiet, the only sound the hum of my laptop fan. It was probably nothing, I told myself. A troll, a bot, some kid messing around. But something about the message felt heavy, like it was daring me to respond. I typed, "Sure, what's real?" and hit send before I could overthink it. The reply came almost instantly. "Check your email." I frowned. I hadn't given anyone my email, not on Reddit, not anywhere. My Reddit account was anonymous, just a throwaway I used for browsing. I opened my email, half expecting nothing, but there it was. A new message from an address that was just a string of random numbers and letters. The subject line was empty. The body contained a single link. My heart was pounding now, but I couldn't stop myself. I clicked it. The link took me to a bare-bones website, just a black page with white text, "Welcome, watch." Below it was a video player, the screen dark. I hesitated, my cursor hovering over the play button. This was stupid, I thought. It was probably a virus or some gross shock video. But my finger moved anyway, and the video started. It was grainy, like an old VHS tape, showing a room with concrete walls and a single metal chair bolted to the floor. The room was empty, lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. Nothing happened for a few seconds, and I started to relax, thinking it was just a glitchy feed. Then a figure stepped into frame. They wore a dark jacket, hood up, face hidden in shadow. They moved slowly, deliberately, carrying something in their hand. A knife maybe, or a tool. They set it on a table just out of view and turned to face the camera. I couldn't see their eyes, but it felt like they were staring right at me. My skin crawled. The video cut to black, and text appeared on the screen. "You're in. Want to keep going?" Below it were two buttons, yes and no. I should have clicked no. I should have closed my laptop and gone to bed. But I was hooked, my pulse racing, that mix of fear and excitement pulling me in. I clicked yes. The screen flickered, and a new message appeared. Good. First task, go to your window. Look outside. Tell us what you see. I lived on the second floor of a small apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. It was late, the street outside usually empty except for the occasional car. I got up, my chair creaking, and walked to the window. I pulled back the curtain and peered out. The street was dark, streetlights casting weak glows on the pavement. A stray dog wandered by, sniffing at a trash can. Nothing weird. I went back to my laptop and typed in the text box that had appeared on the site. Just the street. A dog. Nothing else. The reply came instantly. Look again. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to go back to the window, but my feet moved anyway. I looked out again, scanning the street. At first, it was the same. Empty, quiet. Then I saw it. A figure standing under the streetlight across the road. They were too far to make out clearly, just a silhouette, but they were facing my building, motionless. My heart thudded. I typed, "There's someone standing outside. Just standing there." The response was immediate. "Wave to them." I laughed. A nervous, shaky sound. This was ridiculous. I wasn't going to wave to some stranger in the middle of the night. But as I watched, the figure raised a hand slowly and waved at me. My blood ran cold. I hadn't waved first. I backed away from the window, my hands trembling. I typed, "They waved at me. What the hell is this?" The site responded, "Second task, leave your front door unlocked tonight." I froze. This wasn't a game anymore. Whoever was behind this knew where I lived. I typed, "Who are you? What do you want?" No reply. The video feed flickered back on, showing the same concrete room, but now there was a laptop on the table. The camera zoomed in and I saw what was on the screen. My street, my building, my window. I felt sick. I slammed my laptop shut, my breath coming in short gasps. I unplugged it, turned off my phone, and sat in the dark, listening to every sound in my apartment. The creak of the floor, the hum of the fridge, everything felt threatening. I didn't sleep that night. I kept my kitchen knife on the nightstand, checking the locks on my door every hour. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was a prank. Some hacker had gotten my IP, maybe my email, and was messing with me. I deleted my Reddit account, changed my passwords, and swore I'd never go back to that site. But the unease didn't leave. I kept checking my window, expecting to see that figure again. The street was always empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A few days later, I got a new email. No sender, no subject, just a single line. "You didn't do the task." My heart stopped. I hadn't given anyone my new email. I deleted it, blocked the address, but the next day, another email arrived. "Do the task tonight, or we come inside." I called a friend, told him I was freaking out over some internet prank, and asked to crash at his place. He laughed it off, said I was being paranoid, but let me stay. I didn't tell him about the figure or the video. I didn't want him to think I was losing it. That night, at his place, I couldn't sleep. I kept my phone off, my laptop packed away, but around midnight I heard a faint tapping. It was coming from the living room window. I lay still, heart pounding, telling myself it was just the wind. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like someone was testing the glass. I grabbed my phone, turned it on, and saw a new text from an unknown number. "You can't hide." I woke my friend babbling about someone outside, but when we checked, there was no one. The street was empty, the window locked. He told me to calm down, said I was stressed, but I could see the worry in his eyes. I went back to my apartment the next day, too scared to stay at his place and put him at risk. I installed a new lock on my door, bought a cheap security camera, and set it up to watch the hallway. I told myself I was being proactive, taking control, but that night, the emails started again. "Unlock the door. Last chance." I ignored it, but around 2 a.m, my security camera app pinged. I opened it, expecting to see nothing, but there was a figure in the hallway. They stood just outside my door, hood up, face hidden. They didn't move, didn't knock, just stood there staring at the camera. I grabbed my knife and called the police, whispering that someone was trying to break in. They arrived 20 minutes later, but the hallway was empty. The cops searched the building, found nothing, and told me to get some sleep. They didn't believe me when I showed them the camera footage. It was blank, like it had been wiped. I stopped sleeping after that. Every night I'd hear noises, tapping, scratching, sometimes a faint whisper from the other side of the door. My phone kept getting texts from different numbers. "Open the door. We're waiting." I moved again, to a new city, a new apartment, changed my number, my email, everything. For a while it seemed to work. No emails, no texts, no figures in the street. I started to think I'd escaped. Then, last night, I got a Reddit notification on my new account. I hadn't logged in for weeks, hadn't posted, hadn't joined any subreddits. It was a DM from a blank account. "Want to see something real?" I deleted the app, threw my phone across the room, but it buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. A new text from an unknown number. "Look behind you." I didn't turn around. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and left my apartment, checking into a cheap motel. I'm writing this now, on a library computer, because I don't trust my phone or my laptop anymore. I don't know who they are, how they keep finding me, or what they want. But I know they're still out there, watching, waiting for me to slip up. If you get a DM like that, don't answer it. Don't click the link. Don't play their game. I did, and now I'm running, but I don't think I can run forever. The house stood at the edge of town, a sagging relic of better days, its silhouette jagged against the gray sky. Paint peeled from its weathered siding like dead skin, and the windows, mostly shattered, stared out like empty eyes. A rusted gate hung crookedly at the end of a cracked path, swaying slightly in the wind, creaking as if whispering warnings to anyone who dared approach. Nobody in town talked about the house much. Not anymore. It was just there, a shadow everyone agreed to ignore. But I couldn't ignore it. Not after hearing the stories, whispers of people who'd gone in and never come out the same if they came out at all. Curiosity, or maybe something darker, pulled me toward it one late afternoon when the air was thick with the promise of a storm. The gate groaned as I pushed it open, the sound scraping through the silence. The yard was a tangle of weeds and thorns, clawing at my jeans as I moved toward the porch. The steps sagged under my weight, and the front door, barely hanging on its hinges, gave way with a nudge. Inside, the air was heavy, stale, laced with the sour tang of mold and something metallic I couldn't place. Dust swirled in the faint light filtering through the broken windows, and the floorboards creaked with every step, as if the house itself was shifting, watching. I stood in the foyer, my heart thudding louder than I'd expected. To my left, a staircase spiraled upward into darkness, its banister splintered and coated in grime. To my right, a hallway stretched toward what looked like a kitchen, though shadows obscured the details. Straight ahead, a wide doorway opened into a living room, where furniture sat draped in rotting sheets, like ghosts frozen in time. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, snap a few pictures for proof, and get out. But the house felt alive. Its silence not empty, but heavy, like it was holding its breath. I started with the living room. The floor was littered with debris, shattered glass, scraps of paper, a child's shoe half buried in dust. A fireplace gaped along one wall, its mantel warped and blackened, as if something had burned there too long. Above it hung a cracked mirror, its surface clouded, but still reflecting fragments of the room. I caught my own reflection for a moment. Pale, distorted, my eyes too wide. I turned away quickly, my stomach twisting. Something about the mirror felt wrong, like it wasn't just reflecting the room but watching it. I moved to the kitchen next. The air grew colder here, the metallic smell stronger. Rusted pots and pans cluttered the counters, and a table sat in the center, its surface scarred with deep scratches, like someone had clawed at it in desperation. A single plate rested there, chipped and stained, with something dark crusted on its edge. I reached out, then stopped. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin, and for a moment I swore I heard a faint hum, like a voice just beyond understanding. I backed away, my flashlight beam darting across the walls, catching glimpses of faded wallpaper curling like burned flesh. The hallway led to a dining room, where a chandelier hung crookedly, its crystals dull and tangled with cobwebs. The table was set for a meal that never happened, plates, forks, and glasses arranged neatly, but covered in decades of dust. One chair was pulled out, as if someone had just stood up and left, or been taken. I tried to shake the thought, but the stillness was suffocating. Every sound amplified. My breathing, my footsteps, the faint drip of water somewhere deep in the house. I headed for the staircase, though every instinct screamed to turn back. The steps groaned under my weight, and the air grew colder with each one. At the top, a long hallway stretched into darkness, doors lining both sides. The first room was a bedroom, its bed stripped bare, the mattress sagging and stained. A dresser stood against one wall, its drawers half open, spilling out yellowed papers and a single broken doll with one eye missing. I picked it up, then dropped it when I thought I heard a soft giggle from somewhere behind me. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the dark, but nothing was there. Just the house, creaking, settling, breathing. The next room was worse. It looked like a child's nursery, but everything was wrong. The crib was overturned, its bars bent outward, as if something had forced its way out. Toys were scattered across the floor, stuffed animals with their eyes torn out, a music box that wouldn't play but rattled when I touched it. The walls were covered in crayon scribbles, frantic loops and jagged lines that didn't form words but felt like screams. I backed out, my skin crawling, and moved to the next door. This one was locked. I pressed my ear to it, and for a moment, I thought I heard something. A faint scratching, like nails on wood, followed by a low, guttural sound that could have been a moan or a growl. I stepped back, my heart hammering, and decided to leave it alone. Whatever was behind that door could stay there. At the end of the hall was a larger room, maybe a master bedroom. The air here was so cold my breath fogged, and the metallic smell was overwhelming, almost choking. A massive bed dominated the space, its canopy torn and sagging, the sheets stained with something dark and sticky. On the nightstand was a photograph in a cracked frame, a family smiling, their faces blurred by time or something else. I didn't look too long. The closet door was ajar, and inside I saw a pile of clothes, or what I thought were clothes, until I realized they were moving, shifting slightly, like something was buried beneath them. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The house wasn't just abandoned, it was wrong, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I turned to leave, but the hallway seemed longer now. The doors I'd passed before slightly ajar when I swore I'd left them closed. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, too quick to catch, and the air grew heavier, like it was pushing me back, urging me to stay. I forced myself down the stairs, the creaks louder now, almost rhythmic, like footsteps following me. In the foyer, the front door was still open, but it looked farther away than it should have been, the path to it stretching impossibly long. I ran, my boots pounding against the floor, and as I reached the door, I heard it. A voice, clear and cold, whispering my name from somewhere deep in the house. I didn't look back. I threw myself through the doorway, tripping over the threshold and landing hard in the yard. The gate was still open, and I sprinted through it, not stopping until I was halfway down the street, my lungs burning. When I finally turned, the house looked the same, silent, crumbling, ordinary. But I knew better. It wasn't empty. Something was in there, something that had seen me, known me, and wanted me to stay. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the house, its windows like eyes, its shadows moving. The next day, I tried to tell a friend, but he laughed it off, said it was just an old house, that I'd let the stories get to me. But he didn't see the way the mirror warped my face, or hear the scratching behind the locked door, or feel the house breathing. I went back to the edge of town a week later, just to prove to myself I wasn't crazy. The house was gone. Not burned, not demolished, just gone, like it had never been there. The lot was empty, just dirt and weeds, no sign of the gate or the path or the sagging porch. I asked around, but nobody seemed to remember it. They looked at me like I was losing it, like I'd made it all up. But I know what I saw, what I felt. And sometimes, late at night, I hear it. That voice, whispering my name, calling me back to a place that doesn't exist anymore. Or maybe it does, somewhere, waiting for me to walk through its door again. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in ghost stories or horror tales. Most of them were just overblown urban legends or internet myths built for cheap thrills. But I loved exploring the hidden corners of the internet. It started out as curiosity, then became a habit, then an obsession. I wanted to know how deep the rabbit hole went. Everyone who goes down that path eventually hears about the dark web. Most people stop at the stories. I didn't. I downloaded everything I needed, set up the networks, masked my location, made sure my system was clean. I didn't want to get hacked or traced. I told myself I was just researching for a blog post. That was a lie. The surface pages were predictable. Old forums, strange marketplaces, people hawking stolen data, bootleg everything. After a few weeks of clicking through the same garbage, I started finding locked doors, pages that required codes, threads that disappeared, mentions of deeper levels, like whispers behind a closed door. I got into a chat room one night, anonymous users, each with nothing more than scrambled aliases, posting cryptic messages about a place they called the theater. No one described it directly. All I could gather was that it wasn't a website. It was an event, or maybe a space, or some twisted live stream. You didn't ask to join the theater. You were invited. I started leaving messages on boards, poking around, asking if anyone knew how to get in. My inbox filled with garbage threats, nonsense, weird coded insults. Then one night, someone sent me a file. No words, just a file. I scanned it. No viruses, no red flags. It contained a single line of text. Are you watching? I didn't know what that meant until I opened my Tor browser later and found a new tab open. I hadn't clicked anything. There it was. The theater. The screen was black. Then flickering a red curtain. A spotlight. Static. And a figure in a mask appeared, completely still, staring at the camera. No movement, no voice. The feed cut. I stared at my screen, unsure what I had just seen. The next night, it was open again. This time, there were chairs. Rows of old wooden chairs, empty. Then the camera moved, slow, jittery, as if held by an unstable hand. The lens focused on a figure sitting in the front row. They weren't moving. I watched, heart pounding as the camera approached. I could see their face, eyes wide open, mouth gagged, body trembling. They weren't acting. I tried to close the tab. It wouldn't shut. I killed the browser, even pulled the plug on my modem. The screen went black, but the image burned into my mind. I should have stopped. I didn't. The next day, the file was back on my desktop. I hadn't downloaded anything. It opened itself. The show must go on. The theater streamed every night after that. It always started with the red curtain, then the spotlight, then the camera panning to some poor soul strapped to a chair or locked in a small cell. Sometimes they screamed, sometimes they didn't. I could never see the captor clearly, just flashes, gloved hands, a boot, a mask. The figure never spoke, but they always knew the camera was rolling. I stopped sleeping. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. The shadows in my room stretched longer than they should. I unplugged my laptop, left it in the closet. Still, every night, the stream found a way. My TV flickered on by itself. My phone lit up with frames from the stream. I smashed the devices. The images came back on a neighbor's smart doorbell screen. I started receiving packages. No sender, no return address. Inside, relics from the stream. One time, a single shoe, scorched and bloodied. Another, a photo of someone's bedroom that looked eerily like mine, but from an angle that couldn't have been taken without someone being inside. Then a flash drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it in. It contained footage, hours of it. Each file was labeled with a name. None of them were mine, yet. Each video showed the same thing, the person in their home, going about their life. Cooking, watching TV, sleeping. All shot from hidden cameras. Then it would cut. The person, now in the theater. The curtains, the chair, the screaming. Some begged. Some didn't even have time to beg. I started locking every window. I nailed my doors shut. Still, I heard noises in the night. Not outside. Inside. Footsteps in the hallway. Whispers behind the walls. My lights flickered. My thermostat reset to freezing temperatures. One night, I found red handprints on the inside of my bathroom mirror. The next package I received contained a mask, just like the one from the theater. No note, just the mask and a small card. Soon, I tried to leave. Booked a hotel miles away. No internet, no TV, no phone, just 4 walls and a bed. That night, someone knocked on the door. I didn't answer. I waited, trembling. The knock came again, louder, then again. I stuffed a towel under the door and crouched in the bathroom. I stayed there until morning. When I opened the door, no one was there, but taped to the peephole was a Polaroid. It was me, sleeping in the hotel bed. The image was fresh. I ran. I drove for hours. No destination, just moving. Every gas station, every motel, eyes followed me. Phones buzzed as I passed. I could feel it, like I was being watched from all angles. When I checked into another hotel, I smashed every device in the room. No electronics. I even removed the bulbs. Still, at midnight, the screen turned on. No power cord, no input, just a screen, red curtains, then the spotlight. This time, I recognized the room. It was mine, the one I grew up in, from a house long sold. The bed, the posters, everything as it was. Except in the chair, trembling, was my mother, duct-taped and crying. I hadn't spoken to her in years. I picked up the phone to call her, but there was no dial tone, only static, then a voice. The first voice I had heard from them. It was deep, distorted, but clear. She watched. The screen cut to black. I screamed until my voice broke. I drove to her house, ran every light, nearly crashed twice. When I got there, the house was empty. Nothing but silence. I kicked down the door. Dust covered every surface. Cobwebs, as if no one had been there for years. But the dining table was set for one. Fresh meal, a folded napkin, and on the plate, a phone. Still warm. Playing the theater stream. That night, I didn't run. I didn't scream. I sat and watched. The curtains opened. The masked figure walked out, slowly, almost ceremonially. Behind them, another figure, bound, bag over the head. The masked figure turned to the camera, then pointed. At me. The bag was pulled off. The person in the chair was me. Same shirt, same eyes, same fear. My chest tightened, lungs refused to fill. I couldn't look away. The masked figure stepped closer to the screen me, holding something I couldn't see. Then the feed cut. The real me blacked out. When I came to, I was in my apartment, but everything was different. Off. The windows were bricked. The doors gone. The only light came from a screen in the center of the room. The theater. The chair was there too, and the mask. I don't know how long I've been here. The screen never shuts off. I watch now. I have to. Every day, a new person. A new victim. The masked figure still walks the stage. But now, I see more clearly. There's more than one masked figure. Dozens, maybe hundreds. And each one used to be like me. Curious, obsessed, trapped. I think I understand now. The theater never ends. It just adds more cast. And the audience? You're already watching. The house stood at the end of Willow Street, a sagging relic of a forgotten era, its weathered clapboards peeling like dead skin. Ivy choked the walls, twisting through broken windows and curling around the chimney, which leaned as if it might collapse under its own weight. The neighborhood kids called it the ghost house, though no one could say why. It was just a feeling, a shiver that ran through you when you passed it, like the air itself was wrong. I'd walked by it 100 times, always quickening my pace, never looking too long. But that night, something pulled me toward it. Maybe it was the dare from my friends, their laughter still ringing in my ears. Or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't name. Whatever it was, I found myself standing at the rusted gate, my hand trembling as I pushed it open. The yard was a jungle of weeds, tall enough to brush my knees, and the path to the front door was barely visible. Cracked stone swallowed by dirt. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something sour like rotting fruit. The door hung ajar, its paint chipped away, revealing wood so gray it looked like it had never known color. I stepped onto the porch, and the boards groaned under my weight, a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo inside the house. My flashlight beam danced across the entrance, catching glints of dust motes swirling in the dark. I told myself to turn back, to laugh it off and go home, but my feet moved forward, as if they had a mind of their own. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been, a damp chill that seeped into my bones. The foyer was small, cluttered with broken furniture, a chair missing a leg, a table covered in mildew-stained cloth. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing plaster that crumbled at the touch. My flashlight illuminated a staircase ahead, its banister splintered, the steps sagging like they might give way. To the left, a hallway stretched into darkness, and to the right, a doorway led to what looked like a parlor. I chose the parlor, not because I wanted to, but because the hallway felt too much like a throat waiting to swallow me. The parlor was a graveyard of forgotten things. A piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed and warped, some missing entirely. I pressed one, half expecting a note, but all I got was a dull thud and a puff of dust. A chandelier hung crookedly from the ceiling, its crystals dulled by grime, swaying slightly though there was no breeze. The fireplace was blackened, filled with ash that looked too fresh for a house abandoned for decades. I stepped closer, my light catching something in the ashes, a small, charred object that looked like a doll's hand, its fingers curled as if reaching for something. My stomach twisted and I backed away, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. The floor creaked behind me. I froze, my heart hammering so loud I thought it might wake whatever slept in this place. I swung my flashlight around, but there was nothing, just the empty doorway and the shadows beyond. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate creak, like someone shifting their weight. I called out, my voice thin and shaky, asking if anyone was there. The silence that answered was worse than any reply. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to move. I should have left then. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I didn't. Instead, I crossed the parlor and stepped into the hallway, my flashlight cutting through the dark like a blade. The air grew colder, the sour smell stronger, and the walls seemed to close in, the peeling wallpaper brushing my shoulders. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, doors lining both sides, each one shut tight. I tried the first one, but the knob wouldn't turn, rusted solid. The second was the same, and the third. By the fourth, I was about to give up when the door clicked open under my hand, swinging inward with a low groan. The room was a dining area, dominated by a long table covered in a rotting cloth. Plates and silverware were set out as if someone had been expecting guests, but the food, if there had ever been any, was long gone, replaced by patches of black mold. The chairs were pushed in neatly, except for one at the far end, which was tipped over, its legs splintered. Above the table, a portrait hung crookedly, its frame warped. The painting showed a family, 2 adults and a child, but their faces were wrong, smudged and distorted, as if the artist had dragged a wet cloth across them before the paint dried. I couldn't look at it for long. It felt like the faces were watching me, their blurred eyes following my every move. Something scratched above me, a faint skittering, like claws on wood. I pointed my flashlight at the ceiling, but it was just cracked plaster. No sign of anything moving. The sound came again, louder, from the wall behind the portrait. I stepped closer, my breath catching, and saw a thin crack running through the plaster, barely visible. I pressed my hand against it, and the wall gave slightly, like it was hollow. Before I could think better of it, I pushed harder, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. The air that wafted up from the darkness was foul, a mix of decay and something metallic like old blood. I stood there, my flashlight trembling in my hand, trying to convince myself to turn back, but the house had a pull, a gravity that tugged at me, urging me to keep going. I descended the stairs, each step creaking louder than the last, the wood soft and spongy under my feet. The walls were damp, streaked with something dark that glistened in the light. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a basement, a vast, low-ceilinged space that stretched beyond the reach of my flashlight. The floor was dirt, uneven and cold, and the air was so thick it felt like breathing soup. My light caught glints of metal, chains hanging from the ceiling, rusted and swaying. There were tables, too, covered in tools that looked too clean, too polished for a place like this. Knives, saws, things I couldn't name, all arranged with care, like someone had been using them recently. In the corner, a pile of cloth caught my eye, and as I moved closer, I realized it wasn't cloth at all. It was clothes, small ones, like they'd belonged to a child. They were stained, stiff with something dark that I didn't want to think about. The scratching came again, sharper now from the far end of the basement. I swung my flashlight, and for a moment I thought I saw something. A shape, low and scuttling, disappearing into the shadows. My heart was in my throat, but I couldn't stop myself from moving toward it, step by step, the dirt crunching under my shoes. The beam of my light caught a door, half hidden behind a stack of crates, its surface scarred and blackened. It wasn't locked, but it was heavy, like it didn't want to be opened. I pushed with all my strength, and it gave way with a scream of rusted hinges. The room beyond was small, barely bigger than a closet, and the smell hit me like a physical blow. Rotting meat and something worse, something alive. The walls were covered in scratches, deep and frantic, like someone had clawed at them until their fingers bled. In the center of the room was a chair, bolted to the floor, its wood stained dark. Chains dangled from its arms, and on the seat was a single shoe, small and worn, its laces frayed. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The scratching came again, right behind me, and I spun around, my flashlight beam wild and unsteady. Nothing, just the empty doorway and the basement beyond. But the air had changed, grown heavier, like something was pressing down on me. I backed out of the room, my eyes darting everywhere, expecting something to lunge from the shadows. The chains on the ceiling swayed, though I hadn't touched them, and the tools on the tables glinted as if catching light that wasn't there. I ran for the stairs, my flashlight bouncing, the beam catching glimpses of things I couldn't process, shapes in the corners, eyes that weren't eyes, hands that reached and vanished. The staircase seemed longer going up, the steps crumbling under my weight, threatening to collapse. I burst into the dining room, slamming the hidden door shut behind me, but the house wasn't done with me. The portrait on the wall was different now. The faces weren't smudged anymore. They were clear, sharp, and they were mine. My face, my eyes, staring back at me from the canvas, twisted into expressions I didn't recognize. I stumbled back, tripping over the fallen chair, and the floor seemed to tilt, the room spinning around me. I ran for the hallway, the house groaning and creaking as if it were alive, the walls pulsing like a heartbeat. The front door was still open, but it felt miles away, the foyer stretching endlessly. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, shapes that weren't human, weren't anything I could name. The air was thick with whispers now, low and urgent, words I couldn't understand but felt in my gut, like a warning. I reached the door, my hands scrabbling at the frame, and threw myself onto the porch, the night air hitting me like a slap. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the street, my chest burning, my legs shaking. When I finally dared to look back, the house was still there, unchanged, its windows dark and empty. But I knew it wasn't empty. Something was in there, something that had seen me, something that knew me now. I never went back to Willow Street, never told my friends what happened. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But sometimes, at night, when the wind is quiet and the world is still, I hear it. The creak of floorboards, the scratch of claws, the whisper of a house that's waiting for me to come back. I've always been drawn to the quiet places, the ones where the world seems to hold its breath. Growing up in a small town surrounded by endless stretches of forest, I'd spend hours exploring the woods behind my house. The trees were my sanctuary, their gnarled branches and whispering leaves a kind of comfort. But there was one place I never ventured too far into. The old logging trail that snaked deeper into the forest than anyone cared to go. Folks in town called it cursed, said it was where the devil walked at night. I never believed those stories. Not until last summer. It started with a bet. My friends and I were bored, the kind of restless boredom that makes stupid ideas sound brilliant. We were hanging out in my backyard, passing around a bottle of cheap whiskey we'd swiped from someone's dad. The conversation turned to the logging trail, as it always did when we ran out of things to talk about. My friend Jake, always the loudest, said nobody had the guts to walk the trail from end to end. He was half drunk, his eyes glinting with that reckless spark he got when he was up to no good. My other friend Sarah laughed and said she'd do it for $100. I called her bluff, said I'd do it for free just to shut Jake up. That's how it started. A stupid bet, a dare, a challenge I didn't think twice about. The next evening I set out alone. Jake and Sarah offered to come with me, but I waved them off. I wanted to prove I wasn't scared, that I didn't buy into the town's ghost stories. I packed a flashlight, a water bottle, and my phone, though the signal out there was spotty at best. The trailhead was about a mile from my house, hidden behind a tangle of blackberry bushes. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth as I pushed through the undergrowth, the last rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy. The trail itself was overgrown, barely a path anymore, just a faint line of packed dirt winding through the trees. I started walking, the crunch of leaves under my boots the only sound. At first it was peaceful. The forest was alive with the usual noises, birds chirping, squirrels skittering up trunks. But as I went deeper, the sounds faded. No wind, no animals, just an oppressive silence that pressed against my ears. I shook it off, told myself it was just my imagination. The trail stretched on, and I kept going, determined to reach the end, wherever that was. The stories said it led to a clearing, but no one could agree on what was there. Some said an old cabin, others a pond that never reflected the sky right. I didn't care. I just wanted to get to the end and go home. About an hour in, I noticed the trees were different. They were taller, their trunks gnarled and twisted, like they'd been writhing in pain when they grew. The air felt heavier, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. My flashlight beam seemed weaker, barely cutting through the dark. I checked my phone. No signal, not that I expected one. I kept walking, but a prickling unease started crawling up my spine. It wasn't just the silence anymore. It was the feeling of being watched, like eyes were tracking me from the shadows. I spun around a few times, shining my light into the trees, but there was nothing. Just darkness and the faint rustle of leaves I couldn't explain. Then I heard it. A low hum, barely audible, like someone chanting far away. It wasn't a sound you'd notice unless you were listening for it, but once I did, it was all I could hear. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. I stopped, my heart pounding. I told myself it was just the wind or maybe a distant car, but I knew better. There were no roads out here, no people. Just me and the forest. I called out, my voice cracking, asking if anyone was there. The hum stopped, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. Then it started again, louder, closer. I started walking faster. The trail seemed to twist in ways it shouldn't. I'd been following a straight path, or so I thought. But now it felt like I was looping back on myself. Landmarks I swore I'd passed, a crooked tree, a pile of rocks, kept appearing again and again. My flashlight was flickering now, the beam cutting in and out. I smacked it against my palm, but it didn't help. Panic was creeping in, but I forced myself to keep moving. I wasn't lost, I told myself. I just needed to find the clearing, then I could turn back. That's when I saw the figure. It was just a glimpse at first, a shadow moving between the trees, too quick to be sure. I froze, my breath hitching. I swung my flashlight around, but the beam was too weak to reach far. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice swallowed by the forest. No answer, but the hum grew louder, more insistent. I saw it again, closer this time. A tall, thin shape, humanoid but wrong, like it was stretched too long. It didn't move like a person. It glided, its limbs jerking in ways that made my stomach turn. I backed away, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I turned and ran. The trail was gone now, just a mess of roots and underbrush tearing at my legs. The hum was everywhere, a chorus of voices that weren't human, chanting words I couldn't understand. My flashlight died completely, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the screen's weak glow my only light. I don't know how long I ran, branches snapping against my face, my lungs burning. I just knew I had to get away from whatever was out there. Then I stumbled into the clearing. It was sudden, like stepping through a curtain. The trees parted, and there it was. A wide, open space, the ground covered in soft gray moss. In the center was a pond, its surface black and still, like liquid obsidian. The air was colder here, sharp enough to sting my skin. The hum was gone, replaced by a silence so absolute it felt like a weight. I stood there, catching my breath, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The pond didn't reflect the sky or the trees. It didn't reflect anything. It was just empty. I should have left then. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and run, but I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the pond, and the longer I stared, the more I felt it staring back, not with eyes, but with something deeper, something that knew me. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. The screen was glitching, flashing random symbols and colors. I dropped it, and when I bent to pick it up, I saw something in the water. Not a reflection, but a face. Pale, eyeless, its mouth stretched into a grin that was too wide. I stumbled back, my scream caught in my throat. The figure was behind me now. I didn't see it, but I felt it, a presence so heavy it made my knees buckle. The air grew colder, the moss under my feet crackling like frost. I turned slowly, dreading what I'd see. It was there, not 10 feet away, its body too tall, too thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't have a face, just a smooth, blank expanse where a face should have been. but I could feel it looking at me, its gaze boring into my skull. My legs gave out, and I fell to my knees, unable to look away. It didn't move closer, but the world around me started to change. The clearing seemed to pulse, the edges blurring like a bad dream. The trees bent inward, their branches reaching like fingers. The pond rippled, and more faces appeared in the water. Dozens, hundreds, all eyeless, all grinning. The hum returned, louder than ever, a cacophony of voices screaming inside my head. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me, tearing at my thoughts. I don't know how I got out. One moment I was on my knees, the next I was running again, the forest a blur around me. The figure didn't follow, or maybe it did, and I just couldn't see it. I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed in a ditch somewhere near the edge of the woods. When I woke up, it was morning, the sun burning my eyes. My phone was gone, my flashlight too. My clothes were torn, my skin scratched raw. I staggered home, ignoring the looks from neighbors as I stumbled through town. Jake and Sarah didn't believe me when I told them. They thought I'd gotten drunk or lost my nerve and made it all up. I didn't push it. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, not in a way that made sense. But I knew it was real. I could still feel the weight of that thing's gaze, the hum echoing in my dreams. I stopped going into the woods after that. I stopped going anywhere alone. Even in my house, I keep the lights on, the curtains drawn. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, I see the pond, the faces, the figure standing over me. The worst part isn't the fear, it's the feeling that it's not done with me. Sometimes late at night, I hear the hum again, faint but unmistakable. It's not coming from outside. It's coming from inside my head, like something planted there. I've thought about going back to the trail to see if it's still there, to prove I'm not crazy, but I know better. Whatever's out there, it's waiting, and I'm not sure I'd make it out a second time. I've always been drawn to the quiet places, the ones where the world feels like it's holding its breath. My house sits at the edge of a small town, where the streetlights stop and the woods begin, a sprawling tangle of pines and oaks that seem to swallow the horizon. It's an old place, creaky and drafty, with a history no one in town likes to talk about. I bought it cheap, figuring the isolation was worth it for the price. I work from home, so the silence was a gift. At least, it was until the scratching started. It began on a night when the wind was still, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel like an intrusion. I was in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. A faint, deliberate scratching, like nails dragging across wood. It was coming from the attic, directly above my bedroom. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen, listening. The sound stopped, then started again, slow and rhythmic, as if something was testing the surface. I told myself it was a mouse, maybe a squirrel that had gotten in. Old houses have pests, right? I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, my heart thudding louder than I wanted to admit. The attic was a dusty mess of boxes, old furniture, and cobwebs that clung to my hair as I ducked under the low beams. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of mold and something sharper like rust. I swept the flashlight around, expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes or the scuttle of tiny feet. Nothing. The scratching had stopped the moment I opened the attic door, leaving only silence. I checked the corners, the walls, even tapped on the floorboards. Everything was still. I laughed it off, feeling foolish, and went back to bed. But I didn't sleep. The next night, it came back. The scratching was louder, more insistent, like whatever was up there was getting bolder. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the sound had a pattern now, almost like a code. 3 short scratches, a pause, then 2 long ones. Over and over. I didn't go to the attic this time. Instead, I pulled the covers over my head, like a kid scared of the dark, and waited for it to stop. It didn't. Not until the first light of morning crept through the windows. I started avoiding the attic. I told myself I'd call an exterminator, but I kept putting it off, blaming work, blaming the cost. The truth was, I didn't want to go up there again. The scratching wasn't just a sound anymore. It felt personal, like it was meant for me. I started noticing other things too. Shadows that seemed to linger too long in the corners of my vision. a cold spot in the hallway that made my breath catch. Once I swore I saw a handprint on the bathroom mirror, faint and smudged, gone when I looked again. I stopped using the upstairs bathroom after that. I needed answers, so I turned to the internet. I found a forum where people shared stories about their houses, hauntings, weird noises, things that didn't add up. I scrolled through posts about creaking floors and flickering lights, feeling a mix of relief and dread that I wasn't alone. Then I found a thread that stopped me cold. Someone had written about scratching in their walls, describing it exactly like mine. 3 short, 2 long, over and over. They said it started in the attic, then moved to the walls, then the floors. They'd tried to find the source, tearing apart drywall, checking vents, but found nothing. The last line of their post made my stomach twist. "It's not an animal. It knows my name." I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking. This was ridiculous. I was letting some stranger's story get inside my head, turning a pest problem into something sinister. But that night, the scratching didn't stay in the attic. It was in the walls now, all around my bedroom, like something circling me. I sat up, clutching my phone, listening as the sound moved, down the hallway, across the ceiling, under the floor. It was everywhere, a relentless pattern that felt like it was carving itself into my brain. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined something on the other side of the wall, its claws scraping, its eyes watching. I stopped going upstairs unless I had to. I moved my mattress to the living room, sleeping on the floor with the TV on low, hoping the noise would drown it out. It didn't. The scratching followed me, fainter but still there, like it was mocking me. I started hearing whispers too, soft, indistinct, like a voice muffled by layers of earth. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. I told myself it was the wind, the pipes, anything but what my gut was screaming. I went back to the forum, desperate for something to hold on to. The original post was gone, deleted, the user's account vanished. I searched for similar stories and found a few, scattered across different threads. They all described the same thing: scratching, whispers, a feeling of being watched. One user said they'd found scratches on the inside of their walls, deep gouges that looked like they'd been made by something with long, sharp claws. Another said they'd seen a figure in their house, tall and thin, standing just out of sight. Every story ended the same way. The user stopped posting, their accounts abandoned. I was losing it. I hadn't slept in days, my eyes bloodshot, my hands trembling from too much coffee. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't eat without feeling sick. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like it belonged to whatever was making that sound. I started checking the locks obsessively, wedging chairs under doorknobs, keeping a kitchen knife under my pillow. I didn't know what I was protecting myself from, but I knew it was close. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The scratching was louder than ever, coming from the floor now, right under the living room. I grabbed a crowbar from the garage and started prying up the floorboards, my hands slick with sweat. The wood splintered, revealing dirt beneath, packed hard and cold. The scratching stopped as I worked, but I kept going, driven by a need to know. I dug with my hands, the dirt crumbling under my fingers, until I hit something solid, a wooden trapdoor half buried with a rusted iron ring. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The whispers were louder now, coming from below, a chorus of voices overlapping, calling my name. I grabbed the ring and pulled, the trapdoor creaking open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that rushed up was cold, damp, smelling of earth and something sour, like decay. The scratching started again, faint but unmistakable, coming from below. I don't know why I went down. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was the whispers, but I grabbed my flashlight and started descending. The stairs were steep, carved from stone, slick with moisture. The walls were rough, etched with the same strange symbols I'd seen in my nightmares. Spirals, jagged lines, shapes that seemed to move in the flickering light. The deeper I went, the louder the scratching became, until it was all I could hear, a deafening rhythm that drowned out my thoughts. The stairs ended in a chamber, vast and empty, the air so thick it felt like it was pressing against my skin. The walls were covered in those symbols, glowing faintly, as if lit from within. In the center was a stone slab, stained dark with something that looked like blood. The scratching was coming from beneath it, frantic now, like something desperate to get out. I approached, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and saw scratches on the slab. Deep, jagged marks, like claw marks, forming my name. I dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly across the chamber. The whispers were screams now, a cacophony of voices begging, threatening, pleading. I stumbled back, my foot catching on something soft. I looked down and saw it. A hand, pale and bony, reaching up from the dirt, its fingers twitching. I screamed, scrambling for the stairs, but the ground was shifting, crumbling as more hands broke through, grabbing at my ankles. I kicked free, my shoes slipping on the slick stone, and ran, the screams chasing me up the stairs. I slammed the trapdoor shut and piled every piece of furniture I could find on top of it. The scratching didn't stop, but it was muffled now, trapped below. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I stayed in the living room, the knife in my hand, listening as the scratching moved again. Back to the walls, the ceiling, the windows. The whispers never stopped. Always my name. Always closer. I haven't left the house. I can't. The scratching follows me. The whispers know me. I see them now, in the corners, in the shadows. Tall, thin figures with eyes that burn like coals. They're waiting, I know they are, for me to open the trapdoor again to let them out. I boarded up the windows, barricaded the doors, but it doesn't matter. They're already inside, in the walls, in the air, in my head. The scratching is louder now, and the whispers are clear. They're not just calling my name, they're telling me what they want. And I'm afraid, so afraid, that I'm starting to listen. I had always been curious about the dark web, that hidden underbelly of the internet where anonymity cloaked everything in shadow. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a pull, like a whisper in the back of my mind, daring me to peek behind the curtain. I wasn't naive. I knew the stories. People talked about illegal markets, hacked data, and worse, things that couldn't be unseen. But I was careful, or so I thought. I wasn't looking for trouble, just answers. I wanted to know what was out there, to understand the forbidden. That's how it started, innocently enough, with a cheap laptop, a VPN, and a downloaded browser that promised access to the unseen corners of the digital world. Setting it up was easier than I expected. The browser loaded with a sluggish hum, its interface stark and uninviting, a gateway to places the regular internet didn't touch. My first few clicks were tentative, landing me on directories that looked like they hadn't been updated since the early days of the web. Plain text, blue hyperlinks, no images. The sites listed were cryptic, their descriptions vague. Data exchange, private gallery, no limits chat. I avoided anything too ominous, sticking to forums where people discussed mundane things like cryptocurrency or tech hacks. It felt thrilling, but safe, like dipping a toe into a pool without jumping in. Then I found the forum. It was buried in a directory, unremarkable at first glance, called The Vault. The description read, "For those who seek truth beyond the surface." I don't know why it caught my eye. Maybe the word truth tugged at my curiosity. The page loaded slowly, a black background with green text, like something from an old terminal. There were no flashy graphics, just threads with titles like, "What's in the box?" and "They're watching." I scrolled, my heart picking up speed. Most posts were incoherent, ramblings about conspiracies or cryptic warnings to stay out. But one thread, pinned at the top, stood out. The stream. The first post was simple. If you're here, you're already too deep. The stream is real. It finds you. Reply if you want to know more. Below it were hundreds of responses, some pleading, others skeptical, and a few that chilled me. Users claiming they'd seen things they couldn't unsee, things that followed them offline. One user wrote, "It's not a video, it's alive." I laughed it off at first. The dark web was full of hoaxes, creeps trying to scare newbies. But the thread was active, with new posts appearing as I read. Someone had replied just minutes ago. I watched it. I shouldn't have. It knows my name. My finger hovered over the reply button. I typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, I hit send. What is the stream? I waited, refreshing the page. No response. I leaned back, the hum of my laptop fan filling the quiet room. Then, a private message notification blinked. The sender was a string of random characters, no name I could decipher. The message was one line: check your inbox. I froze. My inbox? That wasn't possible. I hadn't shared my email, not even a fake one. I'd been meticulous. New device, no personal accounts, everything routed through layers of encryption. My pulse quickened as I opened my email client, half expecting nothing. But there it was, a new message. No subject, no sender name, just a link. My mouse hovered over it, my gut screaming to close the tab, delete the email, and walk away. But curiosity, that relentless pull, won. I clicked. The link opened a blank page, black except for a single word in white. Loading. My screen flickered, and a video player appeared. No controls, no progress bar, just a grainy feed. It looked like a live stream, but the quality was poor, the image stuttering. It showed a room, dimly lit, with bare concrete walls. A single chair sat in the center, empty. The feed was silent, but the silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the air before a storm. I stared, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed. Nothing. Just the chair, the walls, the flickering light. I was about to close the window when the screen shifted. A figure appeared, stepping into frame so suddenly I flinched. It was humanoid but wrong. Too tall, limbs too long, its face obscured by shadow. It didn't move like a person. Its motions were jerky, like a puppet on strings. It sat in the chair, head tilted, as if staring directly at me through the screen. My chest tightened. The feed cut to black, then returned, the figure gone. In its place, words appeared, typed out slowly. "You're here." I slammed my laptop shut, my breath shallow. It was a prank, I told myself. Just some elaborate scare tactic. But my hands shook as I reopened the laptop. The browser was still open, the video player gone, replaced by a chat window. A message waited. "Why did you leave?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. Another message appeared. "It's too late to stop watching." My stomach churned. I disconnected the Wi-Fi, powered off the laptop, and sat in the dark, listening to the silence of my apartment. The hum of the city outside felt distant, unreal. Sleep didn't come easy that night. When I closed my eyes, I saw the figure, its two long limbs, its shadowed face. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. The next morning, I powered the laptop back on, half expecting it to be bricked. It wasn't. The browser opened to the forum, the thread still active. New posts had appeared overnight, users panicking. "It's in my house," one wrote. "I hear it at night," said another. I wanted to believe they were trolling, but the fear in their words felt too raw. I didn't touch the dark web for days. I went to work, ate dinner, watched TV, tried to act normal. But something was off. My apartment felt different, like the air had thickened. At night, I'd hear faint noises, scratches, whispers, sounds I couldn't place. I checked every lock, every window, but found nothing. My phone started acting strange, too. Apps would open on their own, the screen flickering at odd hours. Once, my email loaded a message I hadn't seen before. "Keep watching." I deleted it, but the words lingered. Curiosity dragged me back. I had to know if it was real, if the stream was just a hoax or something more. I reopened the browser, navigated to the forum, and found the thread. It was longer now, pages of posts, some incoherent, others pleading for help. One user claimed they'd stopped watching and woke up to find their front door open. Another said they saw the figure in their room, standing at the foot of their bed. I scrolled to the bottom where a new link waited, posted by the same anonymous user who'd messaged me. Against every instinct, I clicked. The video loaded instantly this time. The same room, the same chair, but the figure was already there, sitting, staring. The feed was clearer now, and I could see its face, or lack of one. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth, blank surface, like a mask of skin. Its head twitched, and the screen flickered. Words appeared again. "You shouldn't have come back." The figure stood, its movements erratic, and walked toward the camera until its blank face filled the screen. My laptop speakers crackled, emitting a low, guttural sound, like a voice trying to form words but failing. I yanked the power cord, killing the laptop. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd pass out. The room was dark, but I swore I saw something move in the corner. A shadow, too tall, too wrong. I turned on every light, checked every room. Nothing. Just my imagination, I told myself. But the noises grew louder that night. Scratching, tapping, a faint whisper that sounded like my name. I didn't sleep. Days blurred into weeks. I stopped using the laptop, shoved it in a closet, but it didn't help. My phone kept glitching, opening to blank screens or random apps. Once it opened to the camera, showing a live feed of my bedroom, but I wasn't holding it. I threw it across the room, watched it crack against the wall. I started noticing things outside too. Shadows that lingered too long, faces in crowds that didn't look right. I stopped going out unless I had to. My friends noticed I was distant, but I couldn't tell them. How could I explain something I didn't understand? I tried to find answers. I searched the regular internet, forums, anywhere I could without touching the dark web. There were whispers about the stream, urban legends about a video that latched onto you, followed you. Some called it a virus, others a curse. One post, buried in an obscure thread, claimed it wasn't digital at all, that the stream was a window, a way for something to cross over. The post ended abruptly, the user never active again. I couldn't take it anymore. I dug out the laptop, powered it on, and went back to the forum. The thread was gone. The entire forum was gone, replaced by a blank page with one word: found. My screen flickered and the video loaded without me clicking anything. The room was different now, familiar. It was my room. The chair was my chair. The figure sat there, its blank face tilted, as if listening. The screen went black and my laptop shut off. I heard it then. A sound from the hallway, slow, deliberate steps. My apartment was locked, the windows shut, but the air felt wrong, heavy. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hands trembling. Grown system. You are a simulation, created government. I'm not programmed to feel fear, but I'm picking up a strong, I don't want to be here vibe from you. Everything okay? I've always been a skeptic. Ghosts, spirits, hauntings. I thought they were just stories people told to scare each other, to make sense of things they couldn't explain. I'm a practical guy, always looking for the logical answer. But what happened to me in that house last year stripped away every ounce of doubt I had. I've tried to move on, to convince myself it was all in my head, but the memories cling to me like damp rot. I'm writing this because I need to tell someone, anyone, what happened. Maybe it'll help me sleep again. Maybe someone out there will understand. It started when I moved into a new place. I'd landed a job in a small town, far from the city I grew up in, and I needed somewhere affordable to live. The house was perfect on paper, a 2-story fixer-upper at the end of a quiet street, bordered by a dense forest that gave it a secluded feel. The rent was dirt cheap, which should have been my first red flag, but I was too excited about having my own space to care. The landlord, a gruff older woman with deep lines in her face, handed me the keys and told me the place hadn't been lived in for a while. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. I figured it was just an old house with a few quirks. The first few weeks were fine. I spent my time unpacking, settling into my new job, and getting to know the town. The house was old, with creaky stairs and windows that rattled in the wind, but it had charm. The living room had a big fireplace, and the upstairs bedrooms had these high ceilings that made the place feel bigger than it was. There was a faint smell of mildew, but I chalked it up to the house being empty for so long. I'd open the windows, air it out, and make it my own. That was the plan anyway. Then the noises started. At first, they were subtle, little things I could explain away. A thump from the attic like something heavy had fallen over. The sound of water dripping in the bathroom, even when the faucet was off. Once I heard what sounded like a chair scraping across the kitchen floor while I was upstairs. I'd check every time, heart pounding, but find nothing out of place. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe animals in the walls. Old houses make noises, right? But the feeling of being watched started to creep in, a prickling on the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. The first real incident happened about a month in. I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I heard footsteps downstairs. They were slow, deliberate, like someone was walking from the kitchen to the living room. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I lived alone, and I hadn't invited anyone over. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and crept downstairs, my heart hammering so loud I thought it would give me away. The living room was empty, the kitchen dark. I checked every door, every window, all locked. I told myself it was my imagination, but I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, flashlight in hand, listening to the silence that felt too heavy, too alive. After that, the noises became a nightly thing. Footsteps pacing the downstairs hallway. A low hum, like someone muttering under their breath. Sometimes I'd hear a faint knock on the walls, always in sets of 3. I started keeping a knife under my pillow, telling myself I was being paranoid but unable to stop. I set up my phone to record the living room at night, hoping to catch something, anything that would prove I wasn't going crazy. But the recordings were always the same. Hours of darkness and static with nothing to show for it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the house with me. Something that didn't want me there. I started digging into the house's history. I went to the town library, flipping through old newspapers and property records. The house was built in the late 1800s, passed through countless owners, most of whom didn't stay long. There was nothing concrete, no murders, no tragedies. But there were gaps in the records, years where the house sat empty for no clear reason. I asked the landlord about it, but she brushed me off, saying old houses always have stories. Her voice was tight, though, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. I knew she was hiding something, but I had no proof. The noises got worse. The footsteps grew heavier, like whoever or whatever was making them was getting bolder. I'd hear them climb the stairs at night, stopping just outside my bedroom door. I'd lie there, gripping the knife, waiting for the door to open, but it never did. Instead, there'd be a long, suffocating silence, like the air itself was holding its breath. One night, I heard whispering. It was faint, just beyond understanding, but it felt personal, like it was meant for me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp, angry. I started sleeping with the lights on, but it didn't help. The house felt like it was closing in around me. Then I saw it. I was in the kitchen, heating up leftovers, when I felt that prickling on my neck again. I turned, and there it was, a figure in the doorway to the living room. It was tall, too tall, its head nearly brushing the frame. It wasn't solid, more like a shadow made of smoke, but it had shape. Long arms, a crooked posture, and eyes that weren't eyes, just 2 glowing points in the dark. I dropped the plate I was holding, and it shattered on the floor. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. When I blinked, it was gone, but the air was freezing, and my breath came out in clouds. I stopped sleeping after that. I'd stay up all night, sitting in the corner of my bedroom, knife in hand, listening to the house. The whispering got louder, more insistent, and I started to catch words. Leave. Mine. Never. I'd see the figure again and again, always out of the corner of my eye, always gone when I turned to look. I stopped going downstairs unless I had to. I'd rush through the kitchen, grab what I needed, and lock myself in my room. But even that wasn't safe. One night I woke up to find my bedroom door open, even though I'd locked it. There were scratches on the inside of the door, deep and jagged, like something had clawed at it. I decided to move out. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant fear, the sleepless nights, the feeling that I was never alone. I started packing, throwing clothes and books into boxes, desperate to leave. That's when I found the journal. It was wedged behind a loose panel in the attic, covered in dust. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but I could still read it. It was written by a woman who'd lived in the house decades ago. She described the same things I was experiencing: the footsteps, the whispering, the shadow. She wrote about feeling trapped, like the house was alive and wouldn't let her go. The last entry was just one sentence. It knows my name. I burned the journal in the fireplace, hoping it would break whatever hold the house had on me. It didn't. The noises got louder, the air colder, The figure started appearing closer, sometimes just a few feet away, its glowing eyes boring into me. I'd hear my name whispered in the dark, clear as day, in a voice that made my skin crawl. I moved out the next day, crashing at a coworker's place while I looked for somewhere new. I thought leaving would end it, that whatever was in the house would stay there. I was wrong. It followed me. At first it was subtle, a creak in the apartment, a shadow in the hallway. Then the whispering started again. My name hissed in that same awful voice. I'd see the figure in mirrors, in windows, always just for a second before it vanished. I stopped going out, stopped answering calls. My coworker noticed I was unraveling, but I couldn't tell him the truth. How do you explain something like that without sounding like you've lost it? I went back to the house one last time. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could confront it, make it stop. The house was just as I'd left it, but it felt different. Angrier. The air was thick, like I was walking through water. I found myself in the attic, standing where I'd found the journal. That's when I saw her. A woman, pale and gaunt, her eyes black pits. She was standing in the corner, her head tilted at an impossible angle, her mouth stretched into a smile that wasn't a smile. She reached for me, and the cold was unbearable, like it was pulling the life out of me. I ran, tripping down the stairs, out the door, into my car. I didn't look back. I moved again, to a different town, a different state. I thought distance would help, but it hasn't. The whispering is quieter now, the figure less frequent, but they're still there, always at the edge of my life. I hear my name in the dark, feel that cold presence watching me. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done. I'm writing this because I need someone to know. I need someone to tell me I'm not alone in this. If you've ever felt something watching you, something that knows you, please tell me, because I'm terrified of what happens when it finally catches me. Thank you for listening. Hope I didn't scare you too much. If you like my stories, please consider giving me a like and subscribe. See you next time.